There is a moment in every life when the noise becomes unbearable and the silence becomes terrifying, and that is the exact moment when everything begins to change. Most people believe a comeback begins with motivation, energy, or a burst of confidence, but the truth is far quieter and far more uncomfortable than that romantic idea suggests. Comebacks are born in the quiet space where excuses finally lose their power and responsibility slowly starts to whisper your name. You do not wake up one morning suddenly transformed instead. You wake up tired of repeating the same story, tired of explaining the same pain, and tired of promising yourself that tomorrow will somehow be different. And that quiet exhaustion becomes the birthplace of a decision. Not a dramatic decision, not a loud announcement, but a private turning point that no one else can see. It is the moment you realize that waiting has been your favorite hiding place. Many years ago, Dr. Grandpa Henry described this instant as the silent contract you sign with your future. He said the world never hears the signature, yet everything after it is shaped by that invisible ink. At first, nothing around you changes. The room looks the same, the problems remain the same, and the doubts still sit heavily on your shoulders. But something inside you shifts by a fraction so small that even you almost miss it. That fraction is the beginning of clarity. Clarity is not loud or flashy, and it does not arrive with fireworks or applause. It arrives like dawn creeping through a closed curtain, slowly revealing shapes you ignored in the dark. You start to see patterns you once defended. You begin to notice the habits you used to excuse. You recognize the distance between who you are and who you quietly wish you could become. And this is where the story tightens with suspense, because clarity asks a dangerous question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. It asks whether you are truly ready to let go of the version of yourself that has kept you safe, but stuck. The truth is unsettling, because safety and stagnation often wear the same disguise. You begin to sense that the life you tolerate today is quietly negotiating the limits of your tomorrow. And suddenly, the decision no longer feels optional. It feels urgent. It feels necessary. It feels like standing at the edge of a bridge that only appears once in a lifetime. You cannot see the other side clearly. You cannot measure the distance. You cannot predict who you will become after the crossing. But you know, with a certainty that feels both terrifying and liberating, that staying where you are is no longer an option, and that realization is where the comeback truly begins. It begins in silence, in honesty, in a private promise that you refuse to break even when the excitement fades and the road ahead grows uncertain and steep. This is your turning point. The decision sounds simple when described in hindsight, yet in real time it feels like stepping into fog without a map or promise of sunlight. The moment you commit, your mind immediately begins negotiating with your comfort zone, offering discounts on old habits and limited-time excuses that sound strangely reasonable. This is where most comebacks quietly collapse before they even take a second step. Not because the goal was impossible, but because the decision had not yet become an identity. Motivation can start a sentence, but clarity finishes the story. You begin noticing the quiet resistance that lives in everyday routines, hiding inside harmless phrases like later, soon, and someday. Those words once felt comforting, yet now they feel like chains politely asking for permission to stay. You start to understand that progress rarely looks heroic. It often looks repetitive, boring, and quietly disciplined. The suspense deepens because nothing external confirms you are on the right path. No applause arrives, no dramatic music plays, and no one hands you a certificate for choosing growth. Instead, life continues as usual, while your internal world begins a quiet renovation. You question yourself more than ever before. Doubt becomes louder precisely because you finally started moving. Fear tries to convince you that the old life was not that bad after all. This is the hidden test that follows every comeback decision. It is not a test of strength, talent, or intelligence. It is a test of persistence when nothing feels different yet. You wake up expecting transformation and instead meet repetition. You take small steps that appear invisible to the outside world, and somewhere in that invisible effort, the real shift begins taking root. Your standards rise quietly. Your excuses lose their emotional grip. Your focus starts protecting your time like something precious and fragile. Still, the biggest surprise arrives when you realize the world has not changed at all. The same challenges remain waiting outside your door each morning. The same responsibilities call your name. The same obstacles quietly refuse to disappear. And this realization feels both disappointing and empowering at the same time. Because the comeback was never about changing the world first. It was always about changing the decision maker. You begin to see that clarity removes drama from the journey. There is no need for perfect conditions or perfect timing. There is only the quiet discipline of continuing anyway. Day by day, the identity you chose begins to feel less like effort and more like truth. And without noticing the exact moment it happens, you start trusting yourself again. That trust is fragile at first, like a small flame in a windy room. You protect it with routines, boundaries, and promises you refuse to negotiate. Slowly, the unfamiliar path becomes familiar ground beneath your feet. You realize the comeback is no longer a future event waiting to arrive. It is a present reality. You are quietly building every single day. And that realization changes the way you breathe. Forever. At some point along this quiet journey, a realization appears that feels both gentle and powerful, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. You begin to understand that the comeback was never a single dramatic moment waiting in the future, but a series of quiet choices stacking on top of one another until they formed a new reality beneath your feet. The person who once waited for perfect motivation now wakes up, guided by clarity, and that shift feels almost surreal because it happens slowly enough to feel natural. You notice how differently you speak to yourself, how differently you protect your time, and how differently you respond to setbacks that once felt permanent. Obstacles still exist, but they no longer feel like walls. They feel like steps. The fear that once demanded your attention now sits quietly in the background, no longer in charge of your decisions. You begin to trust the process, even when results take time to appear, and that patience becomes a form of strength you never realized you were building. The suspense that once filled your days slowly transforms into quiet confidence, not because everything is perfect, but because you finally believe in the direction you are moving. You realize that the comeback decision did not remove uncertainty. It simply made uncertainty less powerful than your commitment. And that commitment becomes the new foundation of your identity. You no longer ask if you are capable of change, because the evidence is visible in your daily habits, your routines, and the promises you now keep without negotiation. The future stops feeling like a distant fantasy and starts feeling like a destination that is slowly approaching with every consistent action. You understand that clarity was always stronger than motivation, because clarity survives the days when motivation disappears. It survives the mornings when energy feels low and the evenings when progress feels invisible. Clarity reminds you that the decision has already been made, and that reminder becomes a quiet anchor in moments of doubt. You begin to see how one decision reshaped your path, your mindset, and your relationship with time itself. The days feel more intentional, the effort feels more meaningful, and the journey feels less like a struggle and more like a responsibility you are proud to carry. You understand now that the comeback decision was never about becoming someone new. It was about finally becoming someone honest. Honest about what you want, honest about what must change, and honest about the life you refuse to postpone any longer. This is where the story circles back to the beginning, to that quiet moment when the noise became unbearable and the silence became impossible to ignore. The difference now is that the silence feels peaceful instead of frightening, because it is filled with purpose and direction. The bridge you once feared crossing now feels like solid ground behind you, and the road ahead feels open, wide, and full of possibility. The comeback is no longer a hope. It is your reality. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.